is Najmah Brown, and I am an attorney and managing director of the International Legal Department at Al Adwani Law Firm in Kuwait. I'm actually qualified in America. My background is media and technology. So I've dealt with a lot of arbitration, mainly a lot of arbitration provisions, because in entertainment, you do not like to go to court. You know, you like to move things along pretty quickly. I'm a little nervous. So let me relax a little bit. So initially, my thoughts were to create a comparative law analysis on the US and Kuwait. Then I realized I don't want to push you guys to go to America. I want to attract you to come to Kuwait because I would like to do business with all of you hopefully one day. And there are a lot of advantages to arbitration in Kuwait. It was interesting because I was listening to Spiros, and I did do mediation training in Italy. And I remember them saying how important it was to have mediation because it was taking about 10 years in court to get things resolved. So I'm glad that they're making some changes there. And of course, some other things mentioned by my co-panelists are relevant to what I'm going to discuss. So starting off, I wanted to highlight in Kuwait that the government is really pushing to open up industries. So they've created the direct investment law, and they have an agency, the Kuwait Direct Investment Promotion Authority, that's managing this initiative and really promoting to outside investors. So my thinking is when you guys are hopefully having clients that are doing business in Kuwait, you will be really focusing on your arbitration provisions because these will be international transactions, of course, and considering Kuwait as your destination. Because here in the GCC, I notice with a lot of foreign attorneys, they prefer to go to the UK or somewhere out of the GCC. And now I'm seeing a lot of agreements that are preferring to come to Dubai for arbitration. But for my clients, I'm really pushing for things to happen in Kuwait. So, international arbitration. This is a quick agenda. We don't have to worry about that. Obviously, globalization. The expansion and globalization of cross-border investment and trade has led to increased and ever more complex commercial relationships between businesses. So this is a big reason for us to be focused more on arbitration, not skipping over these provisions when they're coming and are being proposed by the opposing parties in our deals. Enforceability. This is a big deal. I will speak more to it later, how it works in Kuwait. The neutral form, we all know that you want to have people on your panel that are unbiased, but also experienced in your industry and are very knowledgeable about your type of deal and dispute. The flexibility of arbitration is wonderful compared to going to court. We all know. The rules are streamlined and far less complex than most national rules of civil procedure. Okay, and then also arbitrators with appropriate experience. Again, I'll speak to more to this in a little bit. We all know what arbitration is, a private form of binding dispute resolution, which is why I wanted to speak more about arbitration and not mediation. We found that in Kuwait, most times when you start with a negotiation or mediation and you leave it there, you end up in court because most of the time both parties are not satisfied with the results. And since arbitration is binding, you're putting more time, more money. Okay, so the results are going to be more favorable for everyone involved. Going back to what I said about looking to go outside of the GCC for arbitration, many of us fail to realize that arbitration has been recognized in Islam and in the Arab worlds for a really long time, many centuries. So we can't say that people here in the region are not experienced with this form of dispute resolution. Okay, so in Kuwait, there are two laws that are governing the arbitration. The first one is law number 11 of 1995 on judicial arbitration for civil and commercial articles. The second is Civil and Commercial Procedure Code number 38 of 1980. Both of these laws outline the formation, operation, jurisdiction, and procedures of the arbitral panel and the issuance of arbitral awards. They also define regulations for international conventions, free trade agreements, and the due application of the reciprocal clause between the parties. So the Kuwait arbitration law is developed in keeping with the prevailing international legal standards for arbitration and conciliation. Although we do not say clearly that we are copying or following the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, but our laws tend to be very similar. And some of the local arbitration centers, they do follow the UNCITRA rules if the arbitration agreement does not have any or the parties have not come up with their own. Proceedings in arbitration, I didn't want to list out all the details, but because these can all be found in the laws that I've mentioned, the articles, and if you need to review these in English, I'm more than willing to email those over to you if you contact me. But the procedural rules applicable to court proceedings are also followed by arbitrators in general and wherever applicable, as far as the evidence gathering, etc. One or more arbitration panels shall be formed at the Court of Appeal, each of which consisting of 3 judiciary men selected by the Supreme Judiciary Council and 2 from the arbitrators registered in the rolls deposited with the arbitration department or of other individuals. So let me clarify. In Kuwait, you can go for free arbitration through the government, and this is their system. And they're going to have this panel set up, and each party is able to present someone of their choosing. If you do not, then your arbitrator will come from the registration roll. So that's why when I was saying the flexibility and the parties have a say in who will arbitrate on their behalf. You do not have to be an attorney. You do not have to be a Kuwaiti, as opposed to the courts in Kuwait. To appear in court, you have to be a Kuwaiti. Obviously, the panelists will probably speak Arabic, so perhaps you want to have someone who speaks Arabic. The laws governing arbitration do not discriminate between international and domestic arbitration. Contracting parties are free to accept provisions in respect of arbitration and to negotiate and include their own rules, and consequently to include in their agreement such arbitration terms as they deem appropriate in circumstances. There are no restrictions on who can represent a party in arbitration. It can represent itself or be represented by any other person of its choosing, whether legally qualified or not, which I've already mentioned. Just so you know, arbitration in government disputes are not allowed generally. That takes extra approval steps. It can be done, but it just takes a longer process. This is a big one, recognition and enforcement of arbitration awards in Kuwait. A lot of businesses that have these deals with Kuwaiti companies, they're arbitrating outside of Kuwait, and then they know, okay, well then I'm going to go into Kuwait and enforce the judgment. We do have some examples. I can speak to a very well-known case. I know, Mutaz, you mentioned that you should look at the specific country for examples. So in Kuwait, there was the Petrochemicals Industries Company versus U.S. Dow. Many of you may be familiar. This was a lawsuit against the Kuwaiti government The PIC is actually operated by Kuwaiti government. So the award was 2.16 billion awarded by the ICC. They then went to Kuwait to have the judgment enforced, and I can confirm by the arbitration firm that handled the case, they have paid the check. They have cut the check, and they've been paid. So Kuwait is safe to come in and enforce your judgments. These are the steps in order to have your award enforced in Kuwait. So I would suggest being very aware of this. If at the beginning of your negotiation stages in these deals, and you're looking at your arbitration agreements, and you're thinking, okay, well, we know we can get paid from Kuwait. Think about the country that you are going to be arbitrating in, and there should be reciprocity with Kuwait. Because if not, you're then going to have to file a new claim in Kuwait. So that judgment, they will consider the judgment, but still, you would have to go through the process all over again. So to avoid that, just keep these requirements in mind. These are various arbitration centers in Kuwait. Arbitration is very popular. It's it's preferred by most business owners in Kuwait, especially when they're dealing with their international partners. When should provision for arbitration be made? For me, as a contract lawyer, I say always. I've never drafted an agreement without an arbitration provision. Even when in my media practice, if I have a one-page appearance release, I always have a provision for alternative dispute resolution and making it clear on the venue and center that I'm going to use. I don't think it's something that should be overlooked. I know it's very common for attorneys to say, well, I'm going to go to court, go to litigation because there's precedent, and I know what the results are going to be, especially when there's a lot of money at stake. But it's still something that you want to flush through and not just push to the side. So since I am like a little Hollywood person, I found this really interesting clip from Silicon Valley Season 2, Episode 10. It can be found on YouTube, but basically there was a dispute over intellectual property. They're in arbitration. The big wigs in this arbitration, they just knew they were going to win, but then the arbitrator realized there was an unenforceable provision within the agreement, and then he basically voided the entire contract. So the little guy ended up winning. So another thing is just make sure that we're doing our research, reviewing all the provisions in our agreements, making sure that they are consistent with the local laws wherever you're going to have your arbitrations, because you don't want this type of situation to happen. I will also add, in Kuwait, one thing that we've experienced in our practice is when we get to arbitration and the panel looks at the arbitration agreement, they will say who signed this agreement for arbitration. And if the person that signed does not have express authority to sign for arbitration on behalf of that company, they will kick it out of arbitration. So please be aware of that. Again, I was just briefly talking about the foreign direct investment law in Kuwait. If you guys are interested, you can always send me an email. But we are envisioning that with this push for new industries and more companies are coming in, we anticipate more legal work. So hopefully for all of us. But I think you had mentioned about the 51% with the foreign direct investment law. The way the government is promoting it is you're able to have 100% ownership in a company in Kuwait. Although right now a big dispute between a Chinese technology company and a Kuwaiti firm is they're making a Kuwaiti remain 1% owner. So they're trying to get around it. So, we just have to be creative in these things, but there's lots of opportunity, like I said, and ideally we are utilizing arbitration in these deals. That's all. Thank you, guys.